Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this month's Big Buzz Breakfast Club, where we will be talking about utilizing stronger relationships to maximize your growth. Brad, do you have the survey results for us? So everybody seems to have a variety of issues spanning the range this morning, with avoiding confrontation being a bit of a front runner. So I am excited to say that we will be talking about all of these items this morning. I am Melissa Lagowski. I am founder, owner, and CEO of Big Buzz Idea Group, and I am honored to be with you today. We have just a couple of housekeeping matters to cover. And the session is being recorded. It will be shared with you after the event via email. So you will have copies of the information again for your reflection, your review, sharing as appropriate and whatnot. And today, if you can put any questions that you have in the Q&A, we will cover those at the end of the session. I want to make sure we get through all of the slides, and then we will come back and revisit those pieces. And we do have closed captioning options just to make our programming more accessible. So you have that feature at the bottom of your screen, and you can select it and disable it in your control panel as you desire. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Big Buzz Idea Group powers nonprofit organizations to fuel positive change in the world. I was an executive director for 3 years originally. Now, cumulatively, I've been an executive director for 10 years. But during my first stint as an ED, I was managing 24 events a year, 12 newsletters, and 8 committees. I had 225 members as well. And I loved what I was doing, but I was a staff of one, and I got burnt out very quickly. And I wanted to really find a way for nonprofit professionals who might be struggling to get it all done and stay focused on their mission and vision to have a good partner in trying to achieve their goals. Thus, I created Big Buzz Idea Group in 2004. We know that many nonprofit executives lack the time, staff, skills, and funding that they need. So Big Buzz Idea Group fills gaps in management, marketing, events, and admin so that you can focus on the big picture and position your organization to thrive. We really like to be able to help you do more in your daily work. Today, as we move into communication, I wanted to start off with this quote. If you just communicate, you can get by. But if you communicate skillfully, you can work miracles, by Jim Rohn. I think that, communication is one of those things that it seems so obvious. It seems so standard. We do it so much on a daily basis, but many of us were not effectively taught how to communicate so that we could actually make an impact. So today we're going to talk about a bunch of different pieces of this puzzle, how they all come together, and how they can hopefully help you achieve more in growing your organization and being able to just build better partnerships and foster stronger relationships so that you can get more done in your world. I think a lot of this starts with building buy-in. And I find that when we think about communication, we always start from our vantage point, which makes total sense, right? We generally know what we know best, and that's always through our eyes, our experiences, and our just our opportunities, our desires, our goals. And oftentimes we spend so much time in our minds, and we don't always stop to think that not everybody around us may have all of that same information. And so I really think to be successful and maximize growth within your organizations, one of the most important pieces is thinking about building that buy-in and what that looks like. And so it's really important to start out with sharing your vision. Oftentimes, again, it's in our mind. We know what we're thinking. We've created that picture. We've thought about it. We may have even incubated this idea for a couple of weeks or a couple of months before we roll it out to our board or our staff or our project managers or our volunteers. And we forget that they are not seeing it, or that they are seeing it for the first time when you unveil it. And so really going the extra mile to create that vision in more tangible detail is really important in helping to foster that buy-in. It's important that you share your expectations. Again, intuitively, we often think people are going to know what their part in the vision is or how they're going to be expected to contribute. But oftentimes, if we as the leaders do not explain that or share our vision for how that's going to come together, other people don't always know. And we have to remember, right, the same way that we're dealing with our daily lives, the same way that we are processing what we have to do, what's going on with our children, our parents, our staff, whatever might be weighing on our mind, other people have all of those same things going on in their lives. So really realizing that it's our job to carve out time for this explanation, and that the more details and the expectations that we share will help us achieve more success. It's important that people understand the importance of the task, the project, or the event that you're working on. What is the ultimate goal? How does it feed into your mission of your organization? I think everything, if you've heard us talk a lot, we're very goal-oriented, and we think everything should tie back to your mission. And so just really thinking about helping others see why this particular item is going to be important to your mission or how it moves your organization in the right direction is also a big part of fostering buy-in. It's important to give your key players a voice in the project. So I generally like to recommend that people, start with your smallest team. Who do you need to build buy-in from? And seek their input from a standpoint that they may have a different vantage point than you do. One of our clients has a large fundraising event every year. And one of the things that we do is we survey the volunteers post-event, because they see things from a lens that, we as the planners and the client as the organizers can't see. And so their feedback and their input on our thoughts and ideas continue to help shape the event in a really positive way, because they're what I call the front line. They're out there talking to people, interacting with people, so they get feedback that we behind the scenes don't always get. And then I do think on that, in that same vein, but on a slightly different note, again, like the surveys from the volunteers, to seek feedback on the idea. Once you've built buy-in with your core team, maybe that's first your staff, then maybe your board of directors, but then continuing to get additional feedback through surveys from your members or your program managers or your volunteers or whoever it is that is your larger audience, continues to also help understand how you might want to shape the project before you roll it out, and just let people know that you're listening and that you really want it to be all that it can be. I think it's important to utilize we and us when we are trying to build a team. If you think about it, that you really need to be like a coach, and any sports team is just a really great example of, they are one unit, right? But they each have different roles, different responsibilities, and how they achieve maximum success. So by explaining what that success is going to look like and really using those terms of we and us and not I, you can continue to foster that involvement and have people really start to feel like this is something you're doing together. It's important to have people report out on a regular basis on their successes, and to really just give, check in with one another so they do feel like a team too. I think it's important to onboard the influencers in your organization when you're looking to build buy-in. So communicating a little bit differently, that might be a one-on-one conversation. I know one of our clients recently had a very sensitive matter, and they are trying to foster the right plan to go forward. And it took a little bit more time. The leaders had to start checking in with board members one-on-one, whereas usually the team likes to have more joint conversations, but we really wanted to make sure everybody was having a voice and that everybody was feeling heard. And so doing it a little differently mattered for that particular client in that particular project. So I encourage you to know that it's not one size fits all, and really kind of working through these pieces is rather important. And then if you want real buy-in, making each of your contributors feel special or important is also, a really high level best practice on this initiative, because people want to know that their contributions matter. Again, we're all very busy, I think more so coming out of the pandemic and getting back to, reinventing the future and what comes next. And so people are just incredibly busy. And if they don't feel like they're making meaningful contributions, it's going to be harder for them to engage and support you. And so just really being able to take the time to call out or recognize those players is important. I know that we at Big Buzz just issued an article even yesterday. Gratitude is one of our pillars, and we issued an article on our blog about how you can recognize people. And so there's some really simple methods in there. So if you are at a loss for that, you might want to check out that blog article, because Kat shared some really great ideas, and it is a nice way to help people know that they're making a difference so that they're likely to stay engaged with you and your organization. When we're talking about communication, it also becomes incredibly important to really do an honest assessment of ourselves. And, we have to think about our strengths. And so I would love for people to put in the chat this morning, when I think about my strengths, I know that I can be very passionate. I know that I can really organize my thoughts pretty well. I know that, I like to involve others. I love to be part of successful teams. I love to be able to talk about those things. And so I really want to know what my strengths are in communicating. I do like to be a good listener. I like to be able to hear from others and seek their input. And I am open to feedback. So, I would love for you to put in what you think some of your communication strengths might be this morning, and just share in the chat so we can also kind of see how people are feeling about yourselves, because I think it all starts there. We really have to know what our strengths are. And I invite you not to be shy. Being empathetic and a good listener, very important. We will talk a lot about empathy today. Empathy is such an important skill and a powerful tool in how we are, whether or not we're good communicators. All right. It seems like everyone else is still waking up this morning. It's rainy in Chicago, so I know it's a little dreary and maybe you're feeling a little sleepy, but I hope that some of these ideas are helping you to assess what your strengths are in communication. We have to also look at our weaknesses. I know for myself, I often go too fast. I often leave out a lot of details. And so in working with my team, I've really had to work to encourage them to ask more questions when I'm not clear, and help realize that I need to get out of my own way. So I try to give more details than what I used to. I try to slow down because I often am rushing and trying to get to the next thing. And so I think that those are some of the pieces that when you think about knowing, I also, one of my other biggest weaknesses, I hate confrontation. So I was right there on that survey this morning about really, I like when things are just running well and it's happening organically. And I don't like to have to be direct, or to confront an individual who maybe they're not meeting their expectations, maybe they're not carrying their share of the load, maybe there's a misstep. But I do like to work through the problems, and usually I'm a good problem solver, so they do tend to offset each other and start to kind of play into one another. So really think about your weaknesses. Some people, they're afraid to speak up. And really, that's one of the ways too. Sometimes we as leaders need to call people out to make sure that everybody's, at the table is being heard, and that we are really seeking feedback from the quiet ones, because sometimes they have really insightful contributions, but we just have to help encourage them to speak up. When you know yourself, it's also think about your preferred communication style, your preferred communication method. These days, we have so many ways to communicate. And, I don't want to date myself too much, but I have definitely seen, when there was so much more in-person conversations, and then we moved into so much more phone, a lot of phone activity, and then the internet came along and email. And so how much is happening by email and now by text? Everybody's trying to get ahead of the curve. And so I know a lot of organizations are utilizing texting in some new ways now, because texting tends to get a different kind of attention. And sometimes, depending on certain audiences, texting is far more successful than email. Although email continues to be the tried and true method that, most people are engaged with at the highest level. But when people want certain messages to stand out, they're starting to use texting. So do you prefer texting? Do you prefer email? Sometimes in email can be wonderful, and it helps us communicate with people at all different times of day in different ways, but sometimes it can be confusing, or it can be misleading that we might assume there's a tone. Another weakness that I have personally when I communicate is that when I get really busy, or I have too much on my plate and I'm rushing to meet all of the deadlines that are around me, then one of my weaknesses is my emails get shorter. I like to be pleasant. I'm always happy. I like to, hi, how are you? Hope things are going well. Wanted to email you about this thing that we need to talk about. But I start to get more direct and just shorter in my communication on email. And some people think that that means I'm upset. So I have to be aware of that and try to be really cognizant that I'm not being too curt or short in my emails, so that it appears that I've got a tone when I do not intend to send one. So really thinking about knowing what your preferred communication style is important, because you're going to default to that. You're organically going to go to what feels natural for you. But as a leader, you have to step up a little bit, and you're going to have to think about what others' communication preferences are, because sometimes you have to work a little harder to meet them where they are. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. I think as you are looking at your strengths and weaknesses, maybe nothing came to mind immediately this morning, but really, like, over the next week, take a little inventory. Be honest with yourself when you're in meetings, when you're connecting with your staff or your board, or even ask, if you've got the right relationship, you can even ask your staff or your team what they see as your strengths and weaknesses. I think oftentimes getting feedback from other people can help us in knowing how others see us. Because it's sometimes is different than we see ourselves. Know your tells. I think some people have a way of, maybe you start like twirling your hair when you get nervous, or maybe your face starts to get red if you are anxious or angry. And so really, again, being aware of those things, that if a conversation gets heated, if a conversation is difficult, do you have any tell signs that start to be, might start to signal that maybe you're a little bit uncomfortable? Maybe you want to think about taking a couple of deep breaths and how you're going to calm yourself down. And so really just being aware of those things, because they can also impact your communication, along with being aware of any triggers. When I talk about triggers, I'm thinking about those things that maybe are deep-seated within you that just sometimes come out, in trying to give you an example of that. One of the things that used to really be a problem for me is that often it's just something I don't like to be excluded. A lot of people don't. It's really very normal, but I also, in order to continue to, work with our clients or to let my team manage our clients effectively on the nonprofit side, I have to let my team do their things. And that doesn't always mean that I am included. And sometimes they are going to work together and I'm not needed. And, sometimes that makes somebody feel a little bit left out. And that can be kind of something that I'm sensitive to. But by being aware of that and just knowing that that's something that I needed to overcome, it really did help come up with some other ways that I do alternative check-ins with my team. We now do regular meetings. We're getting project updates. So I'm staying abreast of the high level picture, but I'm letting them have the room and the freedom to do the work that they need to do without crowding them or micromanaging them so that they can get more done. So I think we naturally all have a little bit of what sometimes people call baggage. I like to call them triggers today, because when you're aware, they can help you have more effective communication when you know what things, maybe they start to get your blood to boil. Maybe there's a certain kind of person that annoys you. And so being aware of those types of things will just allow you to remain calmer and more effective in your own communication, which is where all of this has to start. We also want to get to know the others. And so relationship building is such an important part of effective communication, especially in your nonprofit arena. Whether it's your staff or your board or your members or your audience that you are serving, it really doesn't matter. It's all fostered around the relationships that you are creating. And so we do have to make some investment in those initiatives. And it can be a little bit challenging because, again, I know that as nonprofit professionals, everybody's usually got an awful lot of work on your to-do list. And so being intentional about how you foster these relationships is sometimes hard because it takes time and it takes an intentional investment of your time to foster these relationships so that others can effectively lead under you, support you, lead others within your organization, and so on and so forth. But if you're doing it right, then it starts to become a ripple effect where it will become easier over time because your team gets stronger and stronger the more that you understand one another. I like to always think about identifying common interests as a really great place to start. And when I talk to people about this, it's kind of like a little bit of detective work in a fun way that you really want to find out, are you both baseball fans? Do you both like the same team? Do you both like to cook? Do you both like to travel? But trying to find something you have in common with people in your circle is where some of that trust really will start to go in that relationship building. And obviously, all of the people in your circle, whether they're on your staff or on your board, you already have a common interest in your organization because they're there for some reason. And even understanding what makes your organization the one they want to commit their time and energy to starts to be a really great place to foster the deeper relationship that I'm talking about too. As we talked about your personal communication preferences, you need to think about others' communication preferences. There are some people that I know who prefer to block out time in the morning where they're not available. They're doing their own work and they prefer to, walk and talk. It might be a matter of they are available certain times of the day, or they have certain open door hours where their staff can reach out and then they can check in. And so just really thinking about preferences. How do you use text? Does this person allow you to text them or want you to text them? For a long time, I know that, again, going back to my own personal stories, just to give you some examples, people wanted my cell phone number all the time, but really the only time I was generally not at my desk, I was on site for a project. And so I wouldn't have time to talk if I was out, on assignment anyway. And so like the cell phone number's not the best number to utilize for me. And so just little things like that help us get to understand how to reach people better. Do they have a time of day they prefer to take their calls or their emails, or, those types of things start to really help you effectively reach your board members and your communication up with your staff. Some board members I know, I've seen with some of our clients, they limit when they do their volunteer hours too. And so understanding what that window looks like really helped create bigger involvement and more interaction, because I knew how not to interfere with their job, and we knew how to avoid their family time and where was their volunteer time. So really making the effort to ask those questions can help you significantly. In developing those relationships, it's so incredibly important to continue to build trust. That goes back to that honesty. And sometimes honesty requires us to say things. We may have to be vulnerable. We may have to put things out there that are a little bit difficult, but it really is important that we are sharing honest feedback. I was talking to somebody yesterday who is really struggling right now because their supervisor wants some direct feedback about another coworker of this particular gentleman, and he doesn't want to throw the coworker under the bus, but he also thinks that the coworker could be doing better. So he's very sensitively trying to figure out how he tells his boss, the right information without completely destroying the trust of his coworker or the supervisor. So it's very common that on a daily basis, you're going to have a couple of difficult situations, but really showing up and just agreeing to be honest keeps you in alignment and integrity with yourself. And I think that fosters deeper relationships, because when people know you're being honest with them, it just continues to forge a stronger bond. Again, understanding how people process is important. Some people are fast processors. They can take an idea, take your information, and they're going to run with it. There are some people who are naturally, they need time to sit and incubate it, and they may not have their questions right away. Their questions might come a little bit later. There are a lot of personality assessments out there, right, that tell you no personality is wrong or bad. We all have unique gifts, skills, and talents to contribute, but we do all process a little differently. And so one of the best ways to ask how people process is to simply ask them. Don't try to guess, but generally, like people who are accountants or data analyzers, they don't process the same way that, maybe somebody in a restaurant setting would process, because they just have very different on-demand features, and the work that they're doing on a daily basis, they're incredibly different. And so really being able to think about, do people need time and space to digest the information and provide you feedback? Can they give you immediate feedback? Do they prefer to have 24 hours to review something? Just thinking about those types of things and asking people what kind of processor they are is going to be really effective in helping you, again, maximize your growth and your effectiveness in what you're leading and doing. As Dave mentioned earlier, just putting yourself in others' shoes is often so important. We never know what somebody else is going through at any given minute. Even when we were in the office together, oftentimes we focus very much on our work at work and try to keep our personal life in our personal bucket. But sometimes they cross over, but many times they don't. And so we just don't ever know what somebody might be going through, and being sensitive to the fact of, maybe one day they were a little off kilter, or maybe they didn't quite seem like themselves. So sometimes even asking if everything's okay, just showing that you care, can again foster that relationship. But constantly thinking about things from others' vantage points too is important. As a leader in a nonprofit organization, thinking about what's my board going to want to know. If their role is governance on some big new initiative or some request for a financial approval that you're seeking, what are they going to ask? What would they, if you were them, what would you want to know? And it will start to help you prepare for how to present your story and the information in a way that will hopefully help you build buy-in and get the support that you need. Ultimately, the golden rule always holds true. You want to treat others the way you want to be treated. And I think sometimes it's always really good to think about that. And one of the tips that I really like, I forget where I learned it along the way, but I found it really useful. Oftentimes, to step outside of myself and step into others, I also think about, what would I tell a friend if a friend was in my situation? What would I tell a nonprofit executive director if they were having the same struggle that maybe I'm having with in my role as an executive director? And so when you just start to think about those two rules together of putting yourself in one another's shoes, treating others the way you want to be treated, sometimes you start to get out of your own way and find really good solutions for fostering these relationships with others. And again, making sure that others in your relationships feel seen and heard. Many of our clients, we watch them call out their board members and give them credit for an idea or a thought that they shared at the table. Some people are more ego driven than others. And so some people are not there for the accolades, and they might actually shy away or be a little bashful if you give them accolades publicly. But on the flip side, your staff, your team, those board members, they all want to know, again, that what they're doing is making a difference. And so really letting them know that you see them, that they are contributing, recognizing that is a good way to continue fostering those stronger relationships. As we think about best practices for communication in general, there are just a few things that really we want to think about. And so listening, it all starts with listening. And oftentimes we might be thinking about what we're going to respond to somebody as we're listening. And that is so important for us to try to hit pause on that reflex and focus on what's being said. We really need to think about what the person is saying so we can hear what they might not be saying, and we can engage and ask the right questions if we want to know more about whatever it is they're trying to share with us or the feedback they're trying to provide. So it really all begins with listening. Empathizing and sympathizing, again, incredibly important, because sometimes as leaders, you have to understand that somebody may have fears. Maybe they think that the new idea is not going to work. And maybe they are seeing it from a limited perspective. So taking that, hearing that and embracing that and letting them know, I understand why you might feel that way, but we're going to need to try it. Will you help me roll it out? And then we can review it maybe in a couple of weeks and see if you're feeling differently. So it's just a way to try to acknowledge that you've heard them and really put yourself in their shoes. But sometimes you do still have to go forward. Sometimes when you think about their vantage point, you can again think about information you want to share that will help calm them and get them on board. Sometimes, you have to continue to make difficult decisions and move ahead anyway. So you'll have to continue to manage that effectively. Share details in the detail. Again, I think one of the things that you want to do is just focus on as many details around a project as you can. The roles, the responsibilities, what do you expect from each department or each team or each committee that you are working with? How are they all going to contribute, and what does that look like? Because sometimes people don't fill in the blanks. And so you might just say one thing, like, we're going to hold this event. Well, what is the goal for that event? Why are you doing that event? What is the role for your staff to play in that project? What role is your board going to do, right? Because oftentimes you need your board to help fill the rooms. You need your board to help share the information. So the more you fill in those details and help them understand what their role is in this project, the more success you're gonna achieve. Recognize what you can and can't control. This is so difficult sometimes. We want to be able to force outcomes. And the reality is that there are many things beyond our control. I don't know how many of you might be experiencing some of the internet outages that I know have been happening in a variety of locations this week. But you know, there's just nothing you can do when certain things happen, like an internet outage. So recognizing that there's nothing you can do, but figuring out how can you resolve an issue if that was your event time and your event went down. And then in the next go around, you can even start to plan better and be smarter, because you can think about what's a contingency plan if that ever happens again. And, you know, but we have to just realize that some things are beyond our control. And one of my favorite mentors when I first started in the nonprofit arena, you know, he told me that 90% of the things we worry about never happen. So it was a big part of this letting go of some of the things, knowing that I can't control everything. And I encourage you to also recognize if this affects you. You always want to stay calm. I think sometimes we start to hear something and maybe it starts to, you know, I can start feel myself start to kind of, my shoulders will go up, I'll get a little bit tense. And so just knowing that I might want to focus on my breathing, and I might want to try to, you know, restore my own calmness so that I can be the level-headed person in a conversation that might be challenging or difficult. And even knowing if I start to feel something rising within me, to ask the person if it's not the right time for that conversation, maybe we could schedule a time when we could both show up ready to talk about that. And so we have some privileges and opportunities to not just have to go down a road, again, going back to what we can and can't control. If somebody starts to broach a subject that maybe we weren't prepared to discuss, maybe that's part of a different meeting, maybe that's not something that should be addressed in the group, so you can put it in a parking lot. So remembering that you have the ability to control the dialogue, and you have the ability to lead it and guide it and put things in a parking lot that maybe you're not ready for. And so we just have to honestly and openly communicate those things so that we can kind of diffuse a situation and go back at it when we're maybe a little bit better prepared. It's important that we really don't judge other people in these conversations as well. We don't know what somebody else is going through. We don't know what past experiences they've had. You know, one of the clients that we work with, they've had some really bad experiences in the past with some of the service providers they work with. And, you know, just really knowing that that changes how they approach some of our conversations or how they look at things is really helpful. We don't judge them for that. We understand that there's a reason, but we do try to meet them where they're at in really how they work with other suppliers and what we may need to do to help them feel a little bit more comfortable in the situations where we're managing with them. And then always, I think it's important that we are accepting responsibility. It is hard and it is difficult, but you know, you want to set a good example. You want to show your team, your board, you want to show them how it's done. And so if you do make a mistake, and we all make mistakes, it helps set a tone for how you want others around you to handle mistakes and accept responsibility. So continuing to put that information out there and show people how you are doing it too. We actually at Big Buzz, we had another article a couple of months ago where one of our employees talked about we do a something better sharing every Friday. And in that something better, we are accepting responsibilities for anything that may have come up that week with our clients in our nonprofits that we're working with, so that we can all continue to learn from those experiences and we can take away lessons so that we are all leaving better people. So I do think that owning those problems, those situations, and sharing lessons with one another can be really impactful in helping you grow as an organization, because you can share that with your team in a constructive way so that everybody levels up. And in those sessions, we do not judge, There is no, everybody brings their own mistake to the table or a situation that they observed or saw in their clients. We do not judge. It is not a shameful sharing by any stretch of the imagination, but it really is a way for us all to accept responsibility and try to step up and do better next time if we're ever in that situation again. Best practices for teams. Doing frequent and routine check-ins is incredibly important too. If you think about it, especially if your team is still working remote, I'm not sure how many of you might be back in an office, how many of you might not be going back to an office ever again. A lot of organizations I know have surrendered their office and gotten rid of the overhead that was associated with it. So I think in these days of remote connectivity, that frequent and ongoing check-ins are more important than ever before. I know one of our clients does a daily 15-minute huddle in the mornings. Some of our clients are doing weekly check-ins. Some of them are doing, a team check-in and then one-on-ones, but continuing to make sure you're doing that regularly on whatever schedule is appropriate is incredibly important. It helps the team stay connected, which is really valuable in trying to, again, level up, because it used to be real easy to pop over to somebody's desk and say, hey, what did you think about that meeting? Or, what do you want to do about this current situation? Or did you like this? Do you think that this letter says everything we wanted it to say? And so just continuing to do those check-ins more intentionally will help your team stay more cohesive. And it does take a lot of intentionality in the Zoom and remote environment we are in. One of the hardest lessons for me personally has been learning to be direct. And, that means don't over apologize, don't dance around an issue. There's no judgment. It's just statements, right? It's very much of a, this particular situation is a problem. How can we address it? How can we fix this? How can we work on doing this better next time? And really talking about, if this is the expectation, we have to get, XYZ done by this date. If it's not done by that date, what are the consequences? Sometimes helping people understand the consequences can also be really powerful, but it is important that you try to nip any problems early on. Don't assume they're going to go away. Don't, sugarcoat it or sweep it under the rug. We do have to all learn to be a little bit more direct and just addressing something in the moment. I know in having some of those conversations that we've been having with the one board I was referencing earlier today, we've had a couple of misunderstandings right in the conversations. And so by simply addressing it immediately and saying, so am I understanding you correctly that you want XYZ? They could say, no, I'm so sorry. That's not what I was meaning. This is what I meant. And so we were able to clarify some misunderstandings as they were happening. And it really allowed us to lead those conversations in a better way. Again, being incredibly intentional to make sure we were getting to really clear understanding around the particular issue at hand. You always want to maintain trust and honesty. Again, one of the best examples that I can share is in my early career, I worked in a corporate environment where there was a lot of backstabbing. There was a lot of toxicity. It was not a good environment. And I have heard, across the board, corporates, nonprofits, that the kind of environment can exist within different places very easily. But when you maintain trust and honesty, you dissuade from those types of behaviors. And, you do not engage in cutting down other members of the team, or you keep things above board and you put all of those conversations in a place where everybody can share their thoughts, share their feedback, and talk about how to get to a solution. So part of that is really staying focused on your mission. And when you're mission driven and you remind everybody that if something gets difficult, we're here for this reason. What can we do on this situation that will best serve our mission or our audience or our clients and the people that we are here to serve. And through that, that trust and honesty continues to get stronger when people can lower their guard and they can know they're in a safe space. So it's really important that you have some of those less productive environments going on, that you are doing your best to try to work around them and prevent them from becoming the norm within your organization. Part of that is also being respectful, right? Explaining to everybody the golden rule again, knowing that everyone needs to be respectful to one another. I am working with one board right now. We are constantly telling that board they do a beautiful job of respecting one another, having difficult conversations, coming to a consensus for the organization, and then moving forward in a way that they are still all aligned. And they are having some really difficult conversations about the future of the organization. And so that is really helpful, that they're respectful of one another in giving everybody a space to share their thoughts, but then moving on as a unit. When you are giving feedback, really think about what should be done in private and what should be done publicly. Generally, you want to publicly praise, and if there is a problem, that should be handled privately and never shaming people in front of a group, as that is going to really remove people from your team environment, and it's not going to get you where you want to go. Making sure you are working to understand people is also, we talked about the importance of those relationships and how that plays into all of this with your team, especially. Everybody's got to understand each other. So it's not just you as a leader coming down to your team as well, but it's also within your departments, within your teams. We had a client that they had a few silos within their organization, and they were all very segmented and separated. They all were serving the same mission, but they were not unified in their servant leadership. And so we brought them together, had a powerful retreat, and helped them get realigned so that they understood how they all were serving the same mission. And it helped, as we left that retreat, help them all work together more, because they started to see where they had crossover between departments. So understanding people within the departments, understanding people on other teams, if you really want to achieve maximum growth and maximum success in your organization, those pieces are incredibly valuable. You always want to share the why as well. I found that, as a manager, when people share the why within an organization, people are more likely to understand the importance of an assignment. If you just hand them assignment, it's not always clear. People don't always think it's so important. But when you explain why it matters and why it might need to be done a certain way based on history or past learning experiences, it helps people understand, like, oh, this is a well thought out process and I should adhere to this. So really sharing the why behind some of these things for yourself will help you level up as well. And then teams need to be encouraged to ask questions. It's really important that people know that, clarity comes through the ability to ask questions. And so again, not rushing through, assignments or projects and tasks, but really giving people the opportunity to, ask those questions, get the clarity they need. Giving a pause. Sometimes if you're like me, and it can be uncomfortable to give those pauses, but learning that you need to allow people a couple of minutes to think, and that if you just hold that pause, it may seem like an eternity, but it's really like a minute. And it's okay to let people think through what they've just heard so that they can formulate and share any questions they might have, because your team will then leave stronger and more prepared to, follow the process, enact the project, or whatever the case might be for you. A few other communication insights that are really important. Look for the root concern. Sometimes when people get heated in a moment, it's not always what they're saying that is actually at the root of their concern. And so sometimes you have to continue to ask, like the method that people refer to as kind of like the 5-year-old child, why is that important? Why does that matter to you? And as they talk, to continue to ask, why do you think it's important that we involve those people in this decision? What vantage point do you think they're going to have, so that you can keep looking sometimes to get to the root of what has somebody really riled up around an issue? It can be hard to uncover that. People who irritate us personally often carry lessons for us. And so I do find, right, I mentioned earlier that sometimes being direct is a little bit hard for me. I find that I continue to have opportunities to be direct so that I can continue to utilize that and get stronger and better at exercising that directness that I need to work on. And so just being aware, again, will help you continue to carry forward those lessons. And if somebody is annoying you, I encourage you to think about why and what lesson might be there for yourself. Realize that miscommunication is everyone's fault. You know, again, when I was younger in my career, everybody wanted to blame everybody else. It was very much more of a fixed mindset day and age. And with the growth mindset, we have more advantages and opportunities to solve problems than ever before. So it's not a blame game. Realizing there's two people in every communication at a minimum. And so sometimes it's leaving information out, where the leader might have made a mistake. And so owning it and being vulnerable to share that first can sometimes help your team also continue to come into any miscommunication, mishaps, etc. So you can identify the issues and fix them to go forward, or be better prepared for next time around. It's always important to focus on the shared goals. If you do have some discord with somebody, whether they be a member of your team or your board or a committee, again, focusing on why you're there and that shared mission that you're all trying to serve will always help drive the best discussions as well. Pose the matter as a problem to be solved. So if there is a situation, sometimes it might just be two different ways of thinking. Some of our team is thinking we should do this, and some of our team is thinking we should do that. Let's talk about this and review the pros and cons to each option. So really just thinking about those shared goals and then framing the discussion can help significantly. Identify the common ground, again, knowing that, reminding everybody, we know you all want the best outcome for this project that we are launching next month. But we do need to make some difficult decisions. And I'm going to tell you shortly that difficult is a word that should be maybe refrained from, but, really setting the landscape of letting people know we've got to talk about some of these concerns and address them so that we can really make sure that the rollout goes as well as possible. Because at the end of the day, we're all focused on that common goal of having a successful rollout. How do we do that? So that will be really important. And then the alignment of words and actions. The best example of this is that I know some organizations will say that they want to be open-minded, they want to be open to discussion, but sometimes we will not actually embrace the conversation. We will not always accept people's feedback or share what might be, on somebody's mind, and we actually don't hear them properly in a group setting. So really thinking about, processing it and really giving it the time and space it needs. Again, if you want to be an environment that allows people to ask questions, you need to, again, hold the space for that. Don't say, we want you to ask questions. Somebody asks the question, and then you say something like, oh yeah, thanks for asking the question, but we're not going to have time to address that. We're going to need to just go with this this project as it is. That really sends conflicting messages. And so you really do want to be able to allow feedback space in your planning and allow the proper review of those suggestions and ideas that may come in, or even let people know that sometimes now's not the right time, but it is on a list, it's on the back burner for us to consider in the future. I want to take just a moment to talk about the lizard brain versus the wizard brain. Some people will talk about the monkey brain versus the sage brain. And so there's a lot of different terminology around this particular concept, but instinctually people go into that lizard brain for self-protection. It is a way that, from the caveman days, it is a part of our mind that exists to protect us. And so oftentimes people like, their shoulders, their internal instincts just start to put them on guard and make them resistant to some ideas, versus the wizard brain, which is that higher awareness, stepping into what might be difficult, but pushing through the fear because you know what's on the other side is going to be the achieved outcome that you desire. And so as you think about this, it's really important that you think about the language you might utilize around how you frame these discussions. Difficult, people automatically, that's a word that has some negative connotations, and it might start to make people feel resistant to come into a conversation. And we will talk about a few ideas of conversation starters and ways to maybe help lower that resistance so that you can actually work in the wizard brain space and try to have more productive conversations and outcomes. But you want to use constructive language, and you want to use something that doesn't pose it as like a you versus them, but again, that we are working on trying to identify how to do this new project the best that we can. I want to have a team meeting where we can all share our thoughts and seek feedback. It's much different than we've hit some potholes and we really need to talk about some difficult items. So again, it just helps improve how people show up so that they come more open-minded for meaningful discussions. When you are planning for difficult discussions, it is important to set, to identify the parameters that you're going to want to set for that discussion time. I think you need to be intentional as you go into the meeting or the discussion. You need to really think about what are the goals and the desired outcomes. Being clear on what you hope to accomplish will help keep a conversation focused in a far more productive way, because if you go in not really knowing what the desired outcome is, sometimes a meeting can easily come unhinged and go off the rails. Again, use that constructive language that is very team oriented, think about coaching, right? I think some people think about managers where it might be a directive that comes down and it's more of an order or just a, do this because I said so. And really, you want to think about more of that coaching like a team does, where you need to get them enthused and kind of excited about something, but then they've got to execute. And they have to understand that their piece all plays into that larger puzzle. You as a leader need to be willing to be vulnerable. It's important that, people see you lead by example. So if you want others to be able to be vulnerable in your presence, you often have to demonstrate to them what that might look like. And that means going into a conversation that you may have to tell somebody, something that is really, maybe it's sharing a past experience of yours where you did not do something right or in the best light, to let them know you're real and that you've got experience, and that's what you're drawing from in the recommendations you're making. So that's just one example of how you might be able to demonstrate your vulnerability. Envision the difficult conversations going well. It's important that you really do think about what it would look like in its best light. Often, again, that lizard brain gets us riled up. We all think this is going to be awful. This is going to be hard. It's never going to work. I bet we're all going to fight. I bet we're not going to have any solution. And so you really want to start by envisioning it going well and coming to a consensus and imagining what success would look like in that room. Because oftentimes we can create the pitfalls and the problems without realizing it. And so really by thinking about how we want it to go, it helps us guide the meeting in a better, more effective way. Also, select a low stress time for all parties to come to the discussion. Sometimes I think that you might be thinking about something and you might think now is the right time for a conversation, but your colleague or your board member, they might be on a deadline that has them distracted or short on time, which automatically, when you're short on time, people get a little more tense. And so really thinking about how you can select the time that will allow everyone to come best prepared, super important. And then always highlight some positives. I think this one is one I hope doesn't come as a surprise to anybody, but always continuing to think about how you praise people, how you give good feedback, and then position what might not be working so well so you can identify solutions. It will again help raise the positive energy in a person so that they're coming to the discussion in a better light. As we manage difficult discussions, when you actually enter the conversation and that particular meeting or room, if you're in a board meeting or whatever, again, set the playing field now with all the players. Really remind everybody to stay mission focused. Continue, if you're on Zoom, give guidelines for how questions will be addressed, that you want people to use the raise your hand feature to keep it some sense of order. Even in a room, talking about how you want people to kind of signify if they want to give feedback so that everybody's not talking over each other. It becomes really important. In continuing to step away if necessary. This might be harder in a group setting, but even in a group setting, sometimes if something gets too heated, it might be a good time to take a 5-minute break and just let everybody cool off and reflect a little bit so that then you can come back and say, okay, let's take a deep breath. Let's just really revisit this and what's the real issue here, and get people to kind of reframe the problem or the question so that you can then stay focused on a productive outcome. Also, again, expecting everyone in the committee, the meeting, the team to be able to speak, making sure you're calling out anybody who might be quiet to make sure they've got a voice is important if you are the leader and the moderator. Utilizing I statements versus you statements. Again, over my career, people always start, it used to always be you didn't do this, you should have done that, this was wrong. And that really starts to put somebody, it's shameful, and it gets people to shut down and maybe even stop listening and hearing you. And so utilizing I statements of, I felt really disconnected on this project because I wasn't included in that meeting. It reshapes the conversation in a way that you're talking about you personally and what you think the solution might be. And it's always, right, a good idea too to bring a solution when you've identified a problem. Think about what you might offer up, because that also helps to reframe a discussion in a more positive light. Again, share the desired outcomes with the group, the committee, the team, the board, because you want everyone to know what you guys are working toward. If it's easier to get where you want to go if you know what the end goal is. Stay calm and encourage people to ask questions for clarity. Again, just super simple things, but really important in managing difficult situations. Couple of things, naturally, sometimes somebody will get riled up and it's really natural to want to say, calm down, but that actually will often continue people's blood pressure to rise. So, instead ask questions. What are you really upset about here? What's really troubling you about this project or this new initiative? How can I help? This will help reframe how somebody can communicate to you what the real problem is and help you get to that core understanding that you seek. Again, telling people that I understand can sometimes be a difficult thing. It's very natural that we often want to connect with somebody by saying, I understand where you're coming from, and draw on our own past experiences. But sometimes people don't feel like we could possibly understand. So instead, utilizing the statement, tell me more so I can better understand what you're experiencing, how you're feeling, what you're going through, why you think this is a problem. That's going to be a more productive statement to utilize. And it's just a simple twist on some language that makes a real difference. It's important that you don't take things personally. We at Big Buzz had to utilize the Q-tip, quit taking it personally. And so we started to really be able to call out our team members because we would get defensive. And when somebody starts to take something personally, because we all want to do a good job, your people are at your organization because they care. And so they don't want to feel that they're letting you down. They don't want to feel that they're doing something wrong. And so it's really important, like we had a signal on our team that if we felt somebody was getting defensive, we could just say Q-tip. And it was a way to really signal to somebody else, like, lower your guard. This isn't meant to be something that is a reflection directly on you. This is a problem that we want to fix for going forward, in the system, not with you as a person. And then, sometimes it's hard. We want to smile. Even if you are uncomfortable, again, when I talk about knowing your tell signs, sometimes people will smile organically because when they're uncomfortable, some people smile or laugh. But that can infuriate somebody or make somebody feel not heard if they're talking about something really serious and they feel like you don't understand because you're smiling. So just realizing that not every situation, warrants a smile is also important. And don't return anger with anger. If somebody is really at, high intensity level and they're, really starting to get, overly responsive or overly elevated in their passion and their emotion, it can be hard to resist the temptation to engage or to say no or to defend yourself. And so again, trying to really stay calm, utilizing a low tone in your voice, more monotone in your voice, and not escalating. Some people, a tell, right? They get that higher pitch in their voice. They start to kind of elevate the rise in their voice. So you want to really bring that down. No pointing, no raising your voice back. And if that's hard to do, again, maybe it's time to ask for a pause or step away for a few minutes. It is important to also, set some boundaries. Sometimes you have to defend yourself and advocate for yourself. Please don't talk to me that way. Or if you're going to continue with this kind of behavior, I need to, we'll have to reschedule this discussion when maybe you're a little calmer. It's okay to protect yourself and have some boundaries in the difficult conversations too, if they do get too heated. Always remember in difficult conversations to keep your distance, no touching, as people can be on edge. And sometimes you might want to reach out and kind of nicely brush an arm, hold a hand. But in a lot of these situations, that can really just elevate things. So it's important that you, stay in your own lane. We use the phrase in our family, stay in your own bubble, and just no touching and really until people are calm and it might be more appropriate. Usually in a work environment, it's not always appropriate anyway. So apologizing can help. I'm sorry. I'm going to try to fix this. Again, taking ownership and stepping up if we have made a mistake becomes really important. Listen to your gut. Again, often you will have that internal voice that will be speaking to you. Make sure you honor it. Again, it's important to stay safe. After a difficult discussion, you may need to also give yourself a release and maybe go running, maybe do, an extra cardio workout at the gym, etc. Just making sure you are taking that into account, and then applaud yourself. If you have handled a difficult situation and come out on the other side, recognize where you made strides to improve and what might have been, how that really enhanced where you can go next time, or how you're continuing to be a better leader than maybe you were a week ago or a month ago or a year ago. A few phrases for productive conversations. I need your help. When we are letting people know that we want help, it often, again, lowers somebody's resistance because they realize you're a team and you're trying to work together to solve something. I'm going to run through these rather quickly just to make sure we have time for everything this morning. But, can you clarify what you meant when you said blank? I'd like to talk about blank a little more. Can we carve out a time? Do you have a few minutes to talk? Again, making sure you're both in the right space to talk about whatever it is you need to discuss. I'd like to hear your thoughts about the new project and share what I'm thinking too. That becomes something that really lets people know you want to just hear and think about two sides of something to come out to the best conclusion for the organization. Can you tell me more about that idea? Tell me more about how you see that working. Simple ways to just make people feel a little less defensive. And then a few final thoughts. You do want to create a policy for proper dispute management. There are times that things can go too far. Something may become bullying, something might become harassment. So knowing that you have a policy in place on the front end is really important to be able to manage that if the disputes are within your team and other members of your organization. You just want to make sure that you have that outlined, because if you do have problems that get escalated, it will allow you to handle them better. Mediators might be needed for some situations. So if there's a problem that within the team you're managing or an organization you're part of, sometimes bringing those people together with an independent third party will help come to a conclusion or help everybody feel that they can air their thoughts and come to a productive solution. And that can be really important, because you never want a really bad discussion to escalate so much that somebody leaves and is heated and may start bad mouthing or canceling out, what people are saying about your organization. And remember, this is like working a new muscle. It's going to take practice and continuing to implement these ideas and these thoughts. I hope you all hold on to your copy of this webinar to refer back to it, because it is a new muscle and you will need to continue trying to just get better every day at how you show up and become a better leader on the communication front. With that, I know we only have a couple of minutes, but I would love to know what was your best takeaway, or if you do have any questions, I would love to try to address those in the couple of minutes we have left. Love to know what everybody found most valuable this morning as well, if you want to drop that in the chat. I hope that it absolutely resonated with you, and that, some of these ideas, while not complicated or difficult, are things you can actually start to implement right away. And then I will just mention as well that we will be having a roundtable discussion that, if you would like to join, we would love to invite you to participate in next Thursday, where we will be talking more about this. And people who are participating will be able to share any particular situations within your organization that you might want to talk through. We will be able to learn from one another and just share some experiences and practice